Good Freedom Friday, everybody. It is the first Friday of May, and we've got a lot of stuff going on in the news, a lot of stuff to catch up on. The first and foremost would be the historic leak of a legal document, a first draft opinion by the Supreme Court of the United States in dealing with the Roe v Wade decision. Now, first and foremost, everybody on the left is absolutely up in arms because the left cult that believes in murdering the unborn, this is an absolute sacred cow to them. So they're going absolutely berserk, which leads me to the second point. The fact that this got leaked, it had to have been some kind of an inside job. The Supreme Court has a computer system dedicated to writing some of these drafts and other communications that have to go on in the Supreme Court back and forth between justices, somewhat of a closed door process, so that it allows them the ability and keeps the integrity in the system that they can speak freely back and forth as they deliberate and opine on significant federal law that would be coming out of the Supreme Court. Not dissimilar to the fact of having confidential elections and being able to vote in a ballot box without people seeing what you're doing in order to reduce intimidation or manipulation and fear by outside forces to change your vote. It's the same thing that happens inside the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's got a computer system. They can relay these things back and forth. Obviously, they still do a paper system in some format at times. But this computer system is completely physically detached from the internet. The reason it's detached is to completely block any type of outside threats that would be able to manipulate their way into the system and see some of these closed documents. So the only way that this could have been released would have been an inside job. You might say, well, did one of the justices take this stuff out in a briefcase and leave it at a table in a restaurant after they went to eat? No, because there are very strict guidelines inside the Supreme Court that you are not allowed to take memory cards, computers, written documents, or text of any kind outside of the Supreme Court for this very reason. This has been the case, and it's been in effect for as long as the country's been around. Certainly things have adapted to the digital age. Obviously, they didn't have computers from the very beginning, but this has been the case to ensure the integrity of the court and ensure the integrity such that it is not defied or intimidated by outside influences. So it begs the question, well, how did it get out? Nobody could have got in and obtained access to the internet and get into those computers because they are physically detached from the internet. There's no firewall. There is no physical attachment to the outside world to these internal computers. So what you have to be looking at is somebody, a law clerk, an assistant, or somebody inside the Supreme Court completely betrayed their oath, completely betrayed the integrity of that system, which has run essentially flawlessly since the beginning, by usurping the system and sneaking out a document, whether it was digital or physical, and releasing that deliberately to the news media. And why would they do this? Well, of course they would do it to think that, well, we can see which way the train's going. Maybe we can derail it by getting such a large public outcry that it intimidates other justices from signing on to this, what looks like to be a majority opinion. Okay, so that's first. The next thing is the left and the cult of death is absolutely weeping, wailing, and gnashing their teeth about how this is going to affect their ability to electively go in and force medical instruments into their unborn child and render it lifeless and eliminating it from any future it might have. Of course, the left is saying this is the biggest assault on women's rights. This is what the Republicans have been up to for decades. You get Elizabeth Warren, absolutely losing her mind over this. Okay, well, interesting, Elizabeth, because your party's nominee to replace Justice Breyer, who will be outgoing this summer with a new justice, during the committee hearings on whether or not they were going to seat her in the Supreme Court, she was asked to define what a woman was. She can't even define what a woman is because she's quote unquote not a biologist. Wow, amazing. So, how do we even know this is an assault on women's rights? Because we don't know what a woman is. I guess the biologists out there can tell us maybe, but certainly the latest incoming Supreme Court justice is unable to define that. So everybody on the left is losing their minds over this elective ability to terminate and abort a pregnancy, and it's their body, their choice. Well, this brings me to the next point. Over the course of the last 2+ years with the coronavirus and the vaccines that came with that, we have heard nothing but you will comply, you will take the vaccines, you will take the boosters, you will wear a mask, you'll wear a diaper on your face anytime you're outside of your home. And if they had their way, they would have you do it inside your home, certainly on airplanes, any kind of public transportation. So all these people that were on the warpath up to and including threats and actual termination of people from their places of employment, particularly people on the front line, first responders, medical staff, nurses, were threatened with their job. Now, when the COVID virus first came out, these same frontline people were working without a vaccine, risking their lives, and especially risking their lives if you take the interpretation of the left that it's almost a guaranteed death sentence if you get the COVID virus. The vaccine comes out, they turn around and say, no, there's no choice about this. You're going to take the vaccine or else. Well, how many people lost their job? How many people were cheerleading the system for people to lose their jobs? The Biden administration came out, and any employer with over 100,000 employees working for them, they wanted to mandate that so that they had no choice. They had to take the vaccine or they would lose their jobs. All of a sudden, now they're saying, my body, my choice. Kind of an interesting departure from what we've heard for the last 2.5+ years of all of a sudden now it's my body, my choice. Well, then the next argument you get is the people saying, well, if we crack down on paternal responsibility for these pregnancies, I agree. If somebody fathers a child because they're out doing whatever they're doing and a woman becomes pregnant, then absolutely they should be held responsible. Largely, in the big scheme of things, they are kind of held responsible through the courts in terms of child support and whatnot. Secondly, they say, well, these single mothers, if you're so worried about the child's lives, why aren't they being taken care of with their prenatal needs and needs as a parent? Excuse me, I'm pretty sure that Medicaid, Medicare, whatever falls into that aspect, probably the vast majority of these single unwed mothers that become pregnant has always been paying this stuff along. You've got WIC. Once the child's born, you've got huge payments that the state taxpayer is picking up for WIC, for formula, for baby diapers. All these are straw man arguments that are thrown out on this to elicit emotional response and make us somehow justify that it's okay to terminate the life of a growing child, a growing human being inside the womb of a mother. Going back to my body, my choice, well, it was your choice because at some point in time, you and at least one other, not always, but generally adult person made an adult decision to do something that perhaps could have adult consequences. Your choice ended there. And if it didn't end there, then why can't we take this a step further and say, well, the child is now 6 months old and it's not working out. Is that still a choice? Is that still something as a society that we're willing to say, yeah, you've got a choice that you can still discard this child's life that is now out of the womb and 6 months old? And the argument going along with the leftist murder cult saying, well, this child certainly wouldn't survive without the help of its mother, so it's okay to let that child perish and terminate its life. What's the difference? Where do we stop on this slippery slope? So going back and taking away the hyperbole and the rhetoric coming from the left, and how this is just crazy, it's assault on women's rights, and pretty soon what's it going to evolve into? Minorities and all these other great big tales of grandiose fear coming out of the left. Okay, first of all, the Supreme Court, they interpret law. The problem with the Roe versus Wade decision is the Roe versus Wade decision came out nearly 50 years ago. And when they looked at this, they couldn't really identify anything that specifically spoke to it apart from an interpretation of the 14th Amendment. And they took the interpretation of the 14th Amendment to say there are certain rights enumerated and not enumerated, and this fell in one that was not classified specifically by the verbiage of the 14th Amendment, to say that, well, with a woman's body, it is a woman's choice, and she should be able to terminate a pregnancy by means of abortion. And since there weren't anything that was actually written out in text, the Supreme Court at that time essentially came in and wrote out the verbiage of a statute that would specifically give guidance in terms of the ability for a woman to make the choice to make an abortion. And the problem with that is the separations of power and federalism, which this government is set up on, is the Supreme Court or any judicial branch does not have the right to create legislation and write laws. That is strictly reserved for the legislation or the legislative branch. And if you take it a step further, those rights which are not specifically conferred on the federal branch of government and the legislative body thereof are reserved for the legislative branch of the individual states. That's the problem that we've come to. So if you read the first draft, which was the document leaked by whoever decided they were going to do this and be real cute, you take the majority opinion being written by Alito, and you read into that, and it was his determination that this was grossly written in error, the Roe versus Wade decision, and he's absolutely right. These states' powers lie with the state unless they're specifically given to the federal government. Then they're not. So on the outside, no, number one, even though I wish it was, and I think it's disgusting and it's despicable in 99.9% of the case, they'll throw out the straw man about, well, what about a child that's developing with no organs? Well, okay, let's be real here. That is not the case almost every single time. What about the case with a child that has a severe genetic defect? Again, not the case almost all of the time. Well, what about the times that it's a rape or an incest case? Not only is that not very common, but most states that have laws and what they're calling trigger laws that will go into effect if the Roe versus Wade decision is overturned, most states already have provisions for some of those very, very sad tales of rape and or incest, or of serious genetic mutations which will result in an unviable fetus, baby. They've already taken that into account. Now, the states that haven't, you're looking at states that 50, 100 years ago had written things into the legislative law, and they really weren't thinking about this stuff at the time. And certainly, if Roe versus Wade is being overturned, states are going to revisit this. The states that don't already have trigger laws in effect, they're going to revisit this, and they're going to make exceptions for some of these very rare cases that the left is using for straw man arguments right now about the overturn of Roe versus Wade. This brings us to our next point. If you look at the 14th Amendment and what Roe versus Wade Supreme Court at the time looked at to say that yes, a woman does have the right to terminate a pregnancy, let's go all the way back to when the 14th Amendment was written. The 14th Amendment specifically enumerates rights in its text, and one thing that is specifically not mentioned is abortion. So again, going back in time to the time that the 14th Amendment was written, these things were going on. There were already laws in place about abortion. New York, of all places, had a law that prohibited abortion with severe consequences written into law if you were to provide one or if you were to seek one out. Places like Virginia, other places. Interesting that the Supreme Court at the time of Roe versus Wade would have not enumerated the vernacular and the language into that court ruling, specifically applying to a right to abortion, if they were truly worried about this, and this was one of the cases. This was obviously on people's mind at the time because there were laws in place on the state levels, and the 14th Amendment did not specifically identify those. So people can kick, they can scream, they can say how unfair this is to women. I particularly think it's more unfair to the unborn child, about how bad this is and how this is going to be so devastating to women and to our country. I think it's 100% a win for the unborn, and it's 100% call for accountability on people making adult decisions, having to live with adult consequences. The other thing is there is such a shortage on children that are actually being born. We are really a nation of net importers of adoptions because people, functional families, husbands and wives that want children, can't have children for whatever reason. They can be on waiting lists for years to get an adoption, and many of them resort to seeking children and adoptions outside of the country and bringing children in because there's such a shortage. So this big play, you get guys like Howard Stern saying, oh, we'll let all these unwanted children live at the Supreme Court and those justices can take care of them. Again, hyperbole and straw man, because that is not the case. There are plenty of people that will take these children in, adopt them, and give them opportunity and the opportunity, first and foremost, to live and have a life and continue living, rather than being a second thought of consequences that come from making adult choices and having them terminated. So you're going to hear a lot of kicking and screaming about this. I don't think you're going to see the desired effect of the left from leaking the document to overturn this court decision. I think you're still going to see a majority opinion, certainly a 5-4 and probably closer to a 6-3 decision. You see the left kick and scream, throw temper tantrums, burn down structures, cause civil unrest, call out for civil unrest that you're seeing people like elected federal Democrats doing in their positions of office, doing the exact same thing that they were accusing Trump of doing for the quote-unquote January 6th insurrections. They're calling for flat-out intimidation of the court to get their way. Mob rule. Well, this is exactly what the U.S. Constitution was written for, to prevent, is mob rule. And the founding fathers were so brilliant in their crafting of the Constitution that they saw this stuff coming centuries before the time that we're now living in. Anyway, we'll have more information for you. This is certainly one of the hot button items for the week, and we'll see you again next time.